It arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked neatly under the screen door like a newspaper no one asked for. A manila envelope, stiff and flat, with her name typed across the front in blocky black letters. No stamp, no return address, no explanation, just Dr. Annalisa Halden and silence. The Vermont sky was still gray with early spring fog. Dew clung to the porch railings like forgotten lace, and the goats had just started stirring in the east, pasture, their calls low and drowsy. Annalisa stood still for a moment, coffee in one hand, watching the envelope as if it might move. She had seen enough sudden paperwork in her life, vet bills, farm taxes, settlement notices, to recognize the weight of something unwanted. Her stomach tightened the way it always did before a difficult diagnosis. She picked up the envelope with her left hand, the steadier one, and stepped back inside the house. Her house. The dogs didn't bark. They never did when she was tense. Instead, they padded behind her, silently trailing through the kitchen with soft nails on pine floors. She didn't open the envelope right away. She set it down on the kitchen table beside a pile of invoices and glanced at it like you would a snake behind glass. Then she poured more coffee, fed the dogs, and stepped back out to toss hay into the troughs for the ponies and the 2 rescue alpacas. The rhythm of farm work was steadying motion, breath, presence. It always had been. It wasn't until an hour later, after the morning feed, the first wound cleaning, and a brief moment watching a lamb wobble to its feet, that she returned to the kitchen, pulled the letter from the envelope, and read it. Twice. This letter serves as formal notice to vacate the premises at 282 Hollowbrook Road, effective within 30 days of receipt. Occupancy has been deemed informal and non-permissive by the co-owner, Odessa Halden. She sat back in the chair her father had built by hand 30 years ago and read the sentence again. And then, one more time, the words didn't change. Odessa. Of course, Odessa Halden, her brother's wife of 7 months, the woman with polished boots and an online following who had moved into the farmhouse with a suitcase full of skincare products and a dream of rural branding. Annalisa should have seen it coming. She didn't laugh. She didn't cry either. She just folded the letter in half, then in half again, and laid it flat on the kitchen table beside her mug. Dr. Annalisa Halden was 41 years old, a veterinarian specializing in large animals, and the quiet steward of her parents' land in rural Vermont. She lived alone, not because she couldn't find someone, but because she'd learned long ago that quiet was something to be protected. The farmhouse wasn't flashy. It was functional. 4 bedrooms, 2 barns, a line of maples along the east side, and a red-painted chicken coop that leaned slightly to the left but still held firm. She'd grown up in these walls, learned the sound of the furnace's rattle and how to coax frostbitten pipes back to life. Her parents had taught her how to tend things, animals, land, people. And when they died, first her mother, then her father, just 2 years apart, she stayed. Not out of duty, not entirely, but because she couldn't bear the thought of someone else forgetting which drawer held the good spoons or which floorboard always creaked near the pantry. 4 years ago, when her brother Silas had gone bankrupt, she'd done what felt natural. She invited him home, paid off what she could of his debts, let him stay in the west wing of the house rent-free, no contracts, no discussions. Just, it's yours as long as you need it. She thought that's what family did. And then Odessa came. They met at a mindfulness conference in upstate New York. Odessa wore flowing shawls and had a voice like syrup. Within 3 months, Silas had married her. Within 4, she was living in the house. And by the 6th, she was redecorating. The first to go were the family photos. Then the antique books. Then the rocking chair by the fireplace. It's all just clutter, Odessa had said one afternoon, smiling like she was doing Annalise a favor. You deserve a fresh start too, you know. Annalisa had nodded, biting back the urge to say, this isn't a start. This is what's left. Odessa replaced the porch swing with a bench sourced from a lifestyle catalog. She brought in cream-colored rugs on a farm. She turned the east barn into a photography studio and started tagging the property online under Dr. Halden Heritage Farm. She rarely mentioned Annalise, not in posts, not in stories, Not in the article that recently ran in the Green Hills Chronicle under the title, City Woman Brings Rustic Chic to Generational Property. The headline sat in Annalisa's drawer beside the mortgage receipts. She hadn't been quoted once. She'd let it go, because Odessa made Silas happy, or at least quieter, because the animals still needed her, because conflict never sat well in her body. But this letter, this wasn't silence, this was erasure. She stood and walked to the study. The desk there was old oak, a wedding gift to her parents. She unlocked the center drawer and pulled out the manila folder labeled Property Hollow Brook. Inside were documents neatly arranged and carefully protected. The deed to the house and land. The refinancing statements, every one of them paid by Annalisa. The last will and testament, naming both siblings as beneficiaries, but leaving the residential and operational control to Annalise due to her experience and commitment to the land. She stared at the papers for a long moment, and then she remembered the feed delivery due later that day, the invoice, waiting to be paid, the calf that needed antibiotics. Life, as always, was moving forward, but this time, she would not let it move without her. Inframed. Annalisa reached for her phone and opened her contacts. She scrolled until she found the name she rarely used unless something serious happened. "Hi, Clarice," she said when the lawyer picked up. "It's Annalisa Halden. I think I need to schedule something with you. No rush, well, not urgent, but soon. I just got a letter I'd like to discuss." From someone who seems confused about whose name is on the deed. She paused, then added softly, "I've been quiet long enough." Outside, the goats bleated for attention. The wind moved through the maple leaves like a whisper trying to be heard. Annalisa hung up the phone, folded the letter again, slipped it into the folder with the documents, and got back to work. Because when the world starts rewriting your story, sometimes the only way to answer is to show them who the author really is. It started with a mason jar of elderberry syrup. That's what Odessa brought the first time she visited the farm. She held it out like it was a ceremonial offering, her perfectly manicured nails wrapped around the twine-tied lid, her smile wide and curated. "For immunity," she said. "Made it myself." Annalisa took the jar, politely nodded, and gestured toward the front porch. She didn't ask about the syrup again. She didn't ask about the woven scarf or the linen bag monogrammed with the word Align. And she didn't ask how her brother had gone from flatlining in recovery to falling headfirst into a relationship with a woman who claimed to have left a six-figure wellness coaching business behind to live more intentionally. Odessa Dessa, as she insisted everyone call her, had swept into Silas's life like a wind chime caught in a hurricane. They met at a mindfulness retreat in the Berkshires, a 4-day silent program with crystal meditations and something called embodied finance. Silas, still raw from his second failed business, and the court-ordered rehab that followed, came back glowing, not with sobriety, with infatuation. "She sees me," he had told Annalisa over coffee that spring. "She gets what I'm trying to build." Annalisa had stirred her mug and said nothing. She had heard versions of that sentence before, from Silas and from others. What she hadn't expected was the next call. "We're getting married. Small ceremony. Just immediate family. We want to keep it spiritually clean." She hadn't even met Dessa yet. The wedding took place at a barn venue an hour away. It was rustic-styled, but clearly expensive, dripping in eucalyptus garlands and gold-accented mason jars. Dessa wore a cream dress with bare feet and no veil. Silas looked dazed but happy. Annalisa sat in the back row beside a local friend of Silas's who had clearly come out of obligation. No one from Odessa's family attended. She said her parents were no longer aligned with her choices. When pressed, she changed the subject to goat yoga and chakra mapping. Still, Annalisa tried. She smiled when the photographer pushed her to the end of the family photo. She said, "Congratulations," with warmth. And when the reception ended, she handed them an envelope, a check generous more than she could afford at the time. Odessa took it without opening it, sliding it into her clutch with a quick "bless you," like Annalisa had offered a Kleenex instead of $3,000. They moved into the farmhouse a week later. At first, Odessa was polite in a way that felt vaguely managerial. She brought small gifts, a beeswax candle, a set of handwritten affirmation cards, and offered essential oil blends for the barn. She called Annalisa Doctor, as if it were a nickname of affection, not distance. But the friendliness had edges. Odessa took to rearranging things, subtle at first, a throw blanket here, a new tablecloth there. Then, the changes became more permanent. She repainted the mudroom in pale lavender. She replaced the tin-topped pantry cabinet with a whitewashed modern one. Just trying to brighten the place up, she said. Annalisa bit her tongue so often that first month it was practically muscle memory. But it wasn't just the decor, it was the language. Odessa began referring to the house as our homestead. She started an Instagram account, Halden Heritage Homestead, where she posted curated photos of herself harvesting eggs in flowy linen or journaling in the orchard with a quote from Thich Nhat Hanh beneath the caption. The pictures never included the barn cats or the rusted parts of the fence or the fact that it was Annalisa, not Silas, who got up at 5 a.m. to deal with the birthing ewe. At the feed store, a neighbor asked Annalisa how she felt about your brother's wife bringing new energy to the place. At the co-op, a woman she barely knew said, "That wellness blogger who married Silas, she really turned the farm around, huh?" Annalisa stopped correcting people. It was easier, less exhausting. Inside the house, the changes spread like ivy. Odessa brought in a massive reclaimed wood dining table, twice the size of the old one. She hosted small gatherings with kombucha flights and vegan charcuterie boards. She began labeling cupboards with chalkboard tags and left inspirational quotes taped to the fridge. "Let go to grow one read." Another, "Your roots are not your prison." The irony wasn't lost on Annalisa. The final straw came not with a slam, but with a lock. Annalisa came back late from an emergency foaling and found the inner latch on the west door replaced. The key no longer worked. When she asked, Odessa simply smiled and said, "We're trying to establish sacred boundaries in our space." Our space, Annalisa repeated later in the barn, brushing a tired gelding who leaned into her with the weight of someone who understood more than he should. There was no screaming, no direct confrontation, just the slow rearrangement of who belonged where and who no longer did. Odessa never asked Annalisa to leave. She made it clear that she expected it. It started with the bunting, red and white checked fabric strung across the porch beams, fluttering in the spring breeze like it had been there forever. Except it hadn't. Annalisa would have noticed. She noticed everything that changed around the house because lately things were disappearing faster than she could keep track. She had just returned from an early morning call, a colicky calf at the Tanner's farm that she'd stayed an extra hour to monitor when she turned into the gravel drive and saw the first sign, "Welcome to Halden Heritage Homestead Rebirth and Renewal Picnic." She blinked. The words didn't change. Mason jars filled with daisies lined the fence posts. Chalkboard signs pointed toward hand-churned ice cream and goat yoga demos. The driveway was already lined with compact SUVs and pastel-hued Subarus. Strangers strolled across the front lawn like they belonged there. She parked behind the west barn, out of sight, and sat with the engine running. Her hands stayed on the wheel. The scent of iodine and hay still clung to her shirt. It hadn't been 2 weeks since Odessa painted over the house numbers on the mailbox and installed a metal sign reading the HHH House. Annalise hadn't asked what the third H stood for. She figured Halden Heritage and hashtag. No one had told her about a picnic. No flyer had been taped to the fridge. No email, no courtesy mention in passing. And it wasn't like they didn't know where she lived. She was right down the hall. She got out of the truck slowly. From behind the barn, she could hear Odessa laughing loud and airy, the kind of practice sound made for social media. There was music too, some acoustic playlist full of banjos and Instagram-friendly joy. Annalisa moved along the side of the barn, staying out of view until she reached the corner near the garden gate. She crouched there just far enough back to stay unseen and watched. Odessa stood at the center of it, all wearing a flax-colored linen dress, cinched at the waist. Her hair in one of those loose braids that looked effortless but took 20 minutes to style. She held a small ceramic mug in one hand and gestured with the other, leading a group of guests toward the chicken coop, like a docent at a historic site. And when I married into the Halden family, Odessa was saying I knew I had to honor the legacy. But I also knew it needed revival. This farm was tired, stuck in a certain energy. We've been working to bring it back to life, to make it a place people could feel again. Someone asked if they were planning to host retreats. Odessa lit up. Yes, eventually. Small, mindful gatherings. We're thinking full moon suppers, farm-to-table brunches, maybe even mother-daughter weekends. All rooted in intention. This place deserves that. She smiled wide. Cameras clicked. No one mentioned Annalisa, not the woman who'd kept the roof from caving in during the last ice storm, not the veterinarian who still treated every neighbor's livestock on call sometimes for payment in eggs and goodwill. Not the daughter who stayed when their parents passed, who held her father's hand when he slipped away in the back bedroom of the same house where strangers now took selfies. Annalisa turned away before the tears came. Not because of the picnic, not even because of the lies, but because in that moment it was clear she had already been edited out of her own story. She walked the long way around the barn and entered the house through the mudroom. Her boots left a trail of dried hay on the newly polished slate tile Odessa had insisted on installing last month, for the brand aesthetic. The familiar farmhouse table was gone, replaced by a modern slab of reclaimed walnut that seated 10 and felt more like a showroom than a place to eat. In the corner of the dining room next to a faux fiddle-leaf fig tree sat a gray-painted dresser. Annalisa froze. She didn't need to pull the drawer to know which one it was. It had once been in her childhood room, hand-sanded by their mother with delicate blue flower knobs and drawer bottoms that stuck in the summer. Odessa had repainted it, swapped the knobs, styled it with a vase of dried lavender and a tag that read $180 hand-restored vintage farmhouse dresser. She didn't ask. She just turned, walked down the hall, and opened the linen closet. Empty shelves stared back. No quilts, no flannel, no scent of cedar and thyme. She checked the pantry next. The chipped enamel mugs were gone, the old kettle, the one their father refused to replace, missing. When she peeked into the living room, even the oil painting that once hung above the mantel, an early winter scene of the house done by a neighbor who died years ago, was missing, replaced by a clean, faceless print of the feminine spirit in bloom. At dinner that night, Odessa talked about moving out old energy as she plated beet hummus and kale crackers for her and Silas. Annalisa wasn't offered a plate. She toasted a bagel over the stove burner instead. "You ever feel like you're being haunted?" Odessa asked, suddenly sipping wine from a stemless glass. Annalisa didn't look up. "You mean like a ghost?" "Yeah," Odessa said, laughing. "Like there's a presence in the house, something old that's still lingering?" Annalisa stared at her. "Maybe it's not a ghost. Maybe it's someone you forgot to see." Odessa tilted her head. "That's poetic." Annalisa went back to her bagel. Later that week at the farmer's market, she overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to. She was picking up feed oats when she heard Odessa's name come up behind her, followed by that familiar syrupy voice. "The woman who revived the Holden farm," someone said. "She's amazing," another voice chimed in. "Built it all up with her husband, right? She didn't even mention me." Annalisa whispered to no one, frozen in place. And I was standing 5 feet away. She paid for her feed, walked to her truck, and sat behind the wheel with her hands in her lap. For the first time in months, she didn't drive straight home. Instead, she turned down the back road toward her clinic, a converted barn with peeling red paint and a single office in the back. There in the file cabinet beneath the old radiograph printer was a folder labeled Halden House Legal and Property. She pulled it out. Inside the deed, the mortgage statements, the refinance approval in her name alone, and copies of every check she'd written to save Silas from bankruptcy. She stared at the documents for a long time, not because she needed reassurance, but because up until now she hadn't needed proof. Now she did, because this wasn't just a house anymore. It was a story being rewritten, and she was done letting someone else hold the pen. The envelope was taped to the door with blue painter's tape, neat and centered. Annalisa spotted it the moment she stepped onto the porch after her morning rounds. The horses had been fed, The chickens were settled. She'd even managed to reset the old water pump for the east pasture. It was supposed to be a quiet day. Instead, the paper fluttered slightly in the wind like a threat that had been waiting for her. At first glance, she thought it was another one of Odessa's event flyers. She'd grown used to those pasted to cabinets and fridge doors full of cursive fonts and lavender color schemes. But this envelope was different. Thicker, sealed, stamped in red certified document private. She peeled it off slowly. The door creaked behind her as she stepped inside. She didn't bother to sit, just stood in the hallway, peeled back the seal, and unfolded the 3 pages inside. Her eyes scanned the first line, then the next. Notice to vacate. To the current occupant of the West residence, you are hereby instructed to vacate the premises within 30 days due to non-lease compliance and lack of formal ownership. She blinked. It continued. This decision has been agreed upon by co-owner Odessa Halden and will be enforced by legal counsel if necessary. Your presence has been deemed inconsistent with the future vision and operational harmony of the Halden Heritage Homestead brand. Annalisa set the page down. There were words in there meant to sound official operational harmony, non-lease compliance co-owner. But none of it was real. None of it meant anything. She knew that. She'd taken Property Law 101 in undergrad before switching to pre-vet. Even without it, she could recognize empty threats wrapped in word salad. Still, her hands shook. It wasn't the letter itself. It was the audacity. The fact that Odessa had taped it to the door of a home Annalisa had lived in for 20 years. The same home she had maintained, funded, inherited. And now, apparently, shared by way of marriage with someone who hosted moonlit farm suppers and thought real estate came with vision boards. She stepped into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and read the letter again, carefully, word by word. There were no signatures from lawyers, no court seals, no contact information for legal follow-up, just Odessa's looping signature at the bottom and the words co-owner underlined twice. Co-owner. Annalisa's voice was steady when she finally found Silas in the tool shed later that afternoon. He was tightening the hinges on a new cabinet Odessa had ordered for her essential oils. He looked up like a child caught in the act. She taped a letter to the front door, Annalisa said. He shifted on his feet. I told her not to do that, but you didn't stop her. Silas didn't answer. Annalisa stepped inside, arms crossed. Just so we're clear, you're trying to evict me from the house I've lived in since Mom died, the house I paid to keep when you defaulted on your loans. Silas rubbed the back of his neck. It's not like that. Then how is it she has a vision for the place, Liz. She thinks it could be something more. She says having you there, living in my own home, it makes it harder to create a unified brand. That's what she said. Annalisa exhaled sharply. This isn't a brand, it's a farm, it's a house. It's the place we were raised. Silas looked away. You always make it sound so heavy. She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and left. Later, as the sun dipped behind the eastern tree line and the sky turned violet, she found Odessa arranging flower bundles on the porch. There was a fresh banner tacked to the railing, farm-to-table supper series, limited seats available. Odessa didn't look up when Annalisa approached. I read your letter, Annalisa said calmly. Wonderful. Odessa replied, tying twine around a bundle of rosemary. I'm glad it reached you in time. We're trying to finalize guest accommodations and aesthetic cohesion. Annalisa's voice was like stone. You don't have the authority to evict me. Odessa finally looked up. It's not personal. It's entirely personal. You've made things difficult, Odessa said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The way you linger around the property the clinic calls at odd hours, the animal pens out front. It's not the image we're cultivating. You disrupt the energy. Annalisa laughed once. Energy. Yes, guests feel it. The tension. The disjointed presence. You operate on a different frequency, Annalisa. Annalisa leaned against the porch post. Do you want to know what else guests feel, fraud? Especially when it comes wrapped in essential oils and narcissism. Odessa stood. You've always had this martyr complex. You act like sacrifice makes you holy, but it doesn't. It just makes you bitter. And bitter women ruin beautiful things. Annalisa didn't flinch. Better bitter than invisible. Odessa stared back jaw-tight, and for a long moment neither woman moved. Just the wind between them whistling low through the apple trees. Annalisa didn't slam the door when she re-entered the house. She didn't yell or cry. She walked straight to her bedroom, opened the same manila folder she'd opened before, and added the letter. She labeled it, Attempted Eviction Unlawful. She didn't need to fight yet, but she was done pretending she wasn't at war. Annalisa didn't subscribe to the Addison County Chronicle. She hadn't for years. But she never needed to. Every Friday morning, Mrs. Kipley, her next-door neighbor in the town's unofficial newsletter herself, would leave a folded copy at the gate with a sticky note that usually read, Pigorg A6, you'll smile. That morning, the note was different. Just her name underlined twice. She wasn't expecting to be featured. Maybe it was a profile on the Animal Rescue Center someone had come by last week asking about the goat therapy program. But when she unfolded the paper and saw the full-color photo on page A3, the world narrowed around her. There stood Odessa, front and center on the farmhouse porch, framed by blooming wildflowers and the golden wash of early light. Odessa wore a soft linen dress and a wide-brimmed hat, styled with effortless elegance. Behind her, the Holden home gleamed like something out of a lifestyle magazine. The headline, Modern Homesteader Breathes New Life into Legacy Property. Annalisa read the title twice, then again. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the paper. The article spanned nearly half the page. A breathless feature full of polished sentences about regenerative agriculture, intentional living, and how Odessa Holden, a former wellness coach turned rural visionary, had transformed a neglected Vermont farmhouse into a sustainable heritage experience. Neglected. She scanned the paragraphs faster now, her eyes searching for a name. Any name. Hers. Nothing. There were references to the Holden family generational spirit and ancestral energy. Silas was mentioned, once her husband, business partner, and fellow dreamer. But Annalisa, she wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not as the full-time caretaker of the land for nearly 2 decades. Not as the vet who ran livestock calls through snowstorms. Not as the woman who'd paid the taxes, fed the animals, and walked their mother to her grave. In this new version of the story, she didn't exist. Annalisa sat there, the article trembling in her hands. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched beside her. She stared at the photo again, trying to understand how someone could be so confidently fraudulent, and how no one seemed to notice. Or worse, how no one seemed to care. That evening was the monthly co-op meeting. Usually, Annalisa attended out of habit, not interest. It was mostly a gathering of farmers, growers, and small-scale producers who talked about crop yields and composting strategies. But it was also the place where reputations formed slowly, quietly, over paper cups of cider and shared harvest stories. She debated skipping it, but something inside her, something stubborn and raw, tightened. If she didn't show up, it would be one more space Odessa could claim. She arrived just after 6. The church basement was already buzzing, the folding chairs arranged in a loose circle. Odessa was near the snack table, surrounded by women in denim skirts and flannel holding court with effortless grace. Annalisa walked in unnoticed, or so she thought. Annalisa, there you are, someone called. It was Bonnie from the Orchard Co-op, holding up a copy of the same paper. Big feature today, huh? Annalisa smiled politely. Very big. Bonnie glanced at the paper again. Funny though, I always thought you ran that place. Didn't realize she'd done so much with it. Annalisa's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes shuddered. She slipped into a seat at the edge of the circle. The meeting began with announcements, new vendor opportunities, a local bee die-off, upcoming markets. And then Odessa stood up. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice was clear and honey smooth. Hi everyone, she began. I'm Odessa Holden. I know most of you, but for those I haven't met, my husband Silas, and I run the Holden Heritage Homestead, just up off County Route 9. We've been working hard to restore, not just the land, but the spirit of it. A few people nodded. We see it as more than a farm, she continued. It's a story, a living memory. And as the sole curator of the Halden legacy, I take that role seriously. Annalisa felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Sole curator. It wasn't just disrespect. It was erasure elegantly done, publicly delivered. No one looked at her. No one asked. She sat there, still and quiet, while the room absorbed Odessa's words like gospel. She should have stood up, should have corrected the record, but her body didn't move. Her voice, always slow to ignite, stayed buried somewhere behind her ribs. Odessa wrapped up her monologue with a smile. We're planning a harvest supper series open to the public local vendors featured. I'll post signups online. Applause, enthusiasm. She was in that room exactly what she claimed to be, gracious, visionary, glowing. And Annalisa, still muddy from a morning call to suture a piglet's ear, was invisible. She returned home just after 8. The sun had dipped behind the pines, and the sky had cooled to a soft blue. The porch lights were already on. She walked through the front door, dropped her keys in the bowl by the entryway, and froze. The wall above the fireplace was bare. The wedding portrait, her parents hand in hand on that same porch, the wind in her mother's veil was gone. She checked the dining room. Nothing. Checked the upstairs hall, the guest room, the den. Finally, she climbed to the attic. It was there, wrapped in a thin blanket propped behind a crate labeled winter decor. The frame had a scratch on the bottom corner. She didn't cry. She carried it downstairs, set it gently on her bed, and sat beside it for a long time. Not speaking, not moving, just being. It wasn't just a photo. It was the proof. Proof she had been here, that they had been real, that the home was more than a backdrop for Instagram-worthy branding. Later that night, Annalisa made a cup of tea. She didn't touch it. Instead, she sat at the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and typed Vermont inheritance law eviction from family property fake co-ownership. And then, after a long breath, property lawyer near me, she hit enter. This time, she wasn't looking for reassurance. She was looking for someone who could fight. It took her 3 days to make the appointment. Not because she was hesitant, no, not anymore, but because the act of opening old drawers and pulling out old envelopes meant dragging ghosts into daylight. And those ghosts had always been easier to manage in the dark. The safe deposit box hadn't been touched in nearly 5 years. It sat in a quiet vault beneath the Addison Bank and Trust on Maple Avenue, wedged between a real estate office and a shuttered antique bookstore. The key still had a worn red ribbon tied through the loop her mother's doing. So you don't lose it in your coat pockets, she'd said. Annalisa had never dared remove it. She signed the registry in silence. The young teller, no more than 20, walked her to the vault like she was escorting an old woman. But once the steel box was placed in the small viewing room, the dynamic shifted. Annalisa opened the lid with practiced care. Inside were layers of manila folders carefully labeled. One for property deeds, one for veterinary certifications, one marked simply Silas. She pulled them out one by one, laying them on the table like evidence at a quiet trial. The deed to the West farmhouse, her name on it alone, signed and notarized a decade ago when her parents, sensing their time shortening, had quietly transferred it into her hands. Because you're the only one who stayed, her father had said. This isn't a reward, it's a trust. She found the mortgage payment records next. Every check stub, every deposit slip. 9 years of quiet sacrifice, paid from her clinic earnings, her part-time work with the local rescue, and that one grant she applied for, under the radar, and never told anyone she got. And there it was, tucked inside the folder labeled Silas, a series of money orders. All anonymous. Every rehab bill, every creditor payoff, every medical expense, Silas had racked up when the bottom fell out 4 years ago. She had covered it all, quietly, without thanks, without acknowledgement, because it was family, until now. Clarice Wynn's office was upstairs from a probate court that always smelled faintly of mildew and old wood polish. Her desk was clean, her suit sharp, and her greeting refreshingly unsentimental. "You're sure you want to handle this discreetly?" Clarice asked after scanning the documents. "Yes," Annalisa said. at least for now. Clarice flipped through the deed, her brows rising at the clarity of ownership. This is airtight. You hold the title. You've paid the mortgage. And these, she tapped the tax records, prove occupancy, utilities, and maintenance. On paper, you're not a tenant. You're the owner. And the letter, Clarice snorted lightly, legally meaningless. It's a half-baked intimidation tactic, written by someone who watches too many courtroom dramas. But the fact that she signed it as co-owner, that's fraud if she tried to use it anywhere official. She's trying to rebrand the property under her and Silas's names. Clarice leaned back. Then the fastest way to stop her is to assert your claim publicly. Let me send a letter. A real one. From someone who knows how to use the word estoppel correctly. Annalisa gave the smallest smile she'd made in days. Clarice studied her for a moment. Why didn't you say something sooner? About all this, Annalisa's voice was quiet, because I thought being generous meant being silent. I thought if I stayed out of the way, people would eventually remember who actually kept the lights on. Clarice didn't respond right away, but there was something respectful in her pause. People forget, until the paperwork doesn't let them. That evening, Annalise returned home and went straight to her filing cabinet. She pulled everything: old receipts, veterinary reports, donation ledgers, even the receipts from the time she replaced the roof herself with a crew of local teenagers and a rented scaffolding truck. She labeled scanned-made duplicates. If Odessa wanted to rewrite the Holden legacy, then Annalise would be the one holding the original manuscript. The sun was nearly down when she heard the soft tap on the side door. She opened it to find Mrs. Kipley holding a plate of shortbread and a concerned look. I heard you were home, she said, nudging past. Brought these over before the humidity ruins them. Annalisa gestured toward the kettle. Tea only, if it's not that peppermint stuff. They sat at the table while the dusk settled in. For a few minutes, they just sipped the kind of quiet comfort that didn't require filling space. Then, Mrs. Kipley cleared her throat. I wasn't going to say anything, because it's not my business. But I overheard something the other day when I was at that pop-up yoga thing Odessa runs in the barn. Annalisa blinked. You went to barn yoga once, she said curtly, regretted it instantly. But while I was leaving, I heard Odessa talking to a woman near the fence, probably one of her city clients. They didn't see me. And Odessa said, she's just a guest here. Once she's gone, the real investment can start. Annalisa sat back slowly. Mrs. Kipley softened her voice. Honey, I don't know what's going on, but I do know this: your parents built this place with their hands. You kept it alive, and if she's pretending you don't matter, then you better make damn sure she remembers. Annalisa nodded once. No words, just a resolve settling like stone. That night after Kipley left, she laid every document across the dining table. The deed, the tax filings, the payments, the records, the photographs, the letters. She labeled them all. And then, in a single gesture she'd avoided for years, she opened a new file on her laptop and titled it Holden v. Holden. She didn't want war, but if her silence was being used against her, then it was time to make noise. It started with a call from Micah, the teenager who volunteered at the rescue center on Saturdays. He'd come by early to feed the goats and noticed something odd on the house security feed. I didn't want to alarm you, he said, voice tight, but you should check the footage from this morning. Annalisa pulled up the camera app from her phone, standing in the barn office with the hum of a broken fan circling above her. There it was. At 9:12 a.m., Odessa's SUV pulled up the gravel path. By 9:15, she was inside the West residence. By 9:22, Annalisa's framed veterinary certification was being flung into a cardboard box. The security camera installed discreetly under the porch beam 6 months ago caught every movement, every tossed sweater, every slammed cabinet, every box shoved out the front door. And then came the words. The mic had picked it up clearly, Odessa's voice sharp and furious as she slammed the hallway closet shut. This isn't her house. I own this house now. It's mine. Annalisa watched the rest with a calm that wasn't really calm, just the last stage of something she no longer had words for. She didn't call Odessa, didn't text Silas. She just logged off the feed, closed her laptop, and drove home. It was nearly noon by the time she pulled into the driveway. The front lawn looked like a thrift store yard sale in the middle of a storm. 2 plastic bins had already spilled, scattering scarves and books and old photo albums across the grass. Her childhood lamp, the one her mother hand-painted with tiny barn animals, sat awkwardly beside a worn stack of veterinary journals. And there, pacing the porch like a sentry, was Odessa. She wore yoga pants and a linen tunic, her hair pulled back in a high ponytail phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other. She spotted Annalisa's truck and crossed her arms. "You're late," she said. Annalisa didn't flinch. She parked slowly, got out, and opened the back seat. From it, she retrieved a single folder, dark blue, thick, neatly labeled. She walked up the porch steps with the kind of grace that doesn't beg for acknowledgement. "Odessa," she said quietly, "you've made a mistake." Odessa scoffed. "The only mistake I made was letting you stay this long. You've made this whole property feel stuck. The energy's been off since you came back." Annalisa opened the folder. "I'd prefer if we didn't do this here, but if you insist," she held up the first page. "This is the deed, the original. My name, sole title holder, transferred from David and Lorelei Halden, notarized and filed with the county in 2012. Odessa blinked. "That's fake." Annalisa turned the page. "This is the mortgage ledger. Every monthly payment, every tax filing, every utility bill paid from my account. Consistently, for 9 years. Odessa laughed, nervous, sharp. "Silas and I have been managing the house. No, Annalise interrupted, her voice low but even. "You've been branding the house, hosting workshops, rearranging heirlooms, erasing people. But the structure, the roof that was replaced in 2017, the septic system, the veterinary inspections, that was me." She handed Odessa the folder. "You're welcome to call the police, but if you do, I'll show them this." For a moment, Odessa didn't move. Then she stepped forward, ripped the folder from Annalisa's hands, and rifled through it. Her face changed slowly, mocking confusion, fading into something colder, more frightened. Her fingers stopped at the notarized deed. The paper shook slightly in her grip. "You think this means anything?" she snapped. "You think paper is stronger than presence, than energy." She turned, stormed into the house, and a moment later something small and ceramic flew through the open door and shattered against the side of Annalisa's truck. Annalisa didn't react. She pulled out her phone and calmly dialed 911. "Hello," she said. "Yes, I'd like to report a property dispute and potential vandalism." The dispatcher took her name, address, and details with routine efficiency. She was told an officer would arrive within 20 minutes. Odessa reappeared on the porch 10 minutes later, visibly shaken now, pacing and muttering into her phone. She didn't look at Annalisa again. When the squad car arrived, it was Officer Moreno, early 40s, even-keeled, a local. He stepped out and approached Annalisa first. "Miss Halden?" "Yes, you're the reporting party. I am. I own this residence. My sister-in-law forcibly removed my belongings and damaged my vehicle. Can you prove ownership?" Annalisa handed him a copy of the deed, the payment history, and her ID. He scanned it quickly. "She's still inside." "Yes." Moreno walked up the porch and knocked firmly. Odessa opened the door, her expression already rehearsed. "This is private property," she said. "She's trespassing." Moreno raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, I've seen the documents. This house is in Miss Halden's name." Odessa's voice pitched up. "She's lying. That paper means nothing. She hasn't contributed to the renovations. I've been building a brand here. I've hosted dozens of clients. She's a bitter old hermit who won't let go." "Ma'am," Moreno said, tone sharpening. "You need to calm down. This isn't about branding. It's about legal ownership." Odessa's face collapsed into disbelief. She looked toward the lawn where Annalise now stood beside her scattered belongings, not angry, not crying, just watching. Officer Moreno stepped off the porch. "Miss Halden, would you like to press charges for the damage?" "Not yet," she said. "I'd just like my property back inside, and her to leave." Moreno nodded. "I'll supervise." It took an hour. Every box was brought back in. Odessa didn't touch them. She stayed on the porch, pacing, making calls, trying to regain whatever power had just been stripped from her. Silas never showed up. As the sun dipped low and the air began to cool, Moreno turned to Annalise. If there are further incidents, don't hesitate to file. You've got the cleanest paper trail I've seen in years. Thank you. He tipped his hat and left. Annalisa stood on the porch long after he was gone. She didn't look at Odessa, didn't speak. Instead, she picked up her mother's lamp, carried it inside, and closed the door behind her. It didn't slam, but it echoed. Silas showed up the next morning as if summoned by the weight of what had happened. His truck rolled up slow and dusty, and for a moment, Annalise thought maybe he'd just keep driving past. But he parked. He sat behind the wheel for a long time before finally stepping out, his shoulders hunched like a man already halfway through an apology. Annalisa was in the garden tending to a row of late summer squash. She didn't look up when she heard the crunch of his boots on gravel. She kept her hands moving, pulling weeds, clearing out what didn't belong. He stopped a few feet away. "Hey, Annie." She stood brushing her hands off on her jeans. "Silas." His voice cracked immediately. "I heard what happened. Odessa. She told me you overreacted, that you called the cops, that you made a scene." Annalisa wiped a bit of dirt from her palm with a cloth. "I didn't overreact. I recorded her. She threw my things out of my house and damaged my truck. You've seen the deed. You know whose name is on it." Silas nodded sheepish. I know. That's why I came." She waited. He inhaled hard. "Please don't press charges." She panicked. She thought you were trying to evict her. Annalisa blinked. "She taped a fake eviction notice to my door, Silas. She told people I didn't exist. She painted over our mother's pantry. And you let her." He rubbed the back of his neck like he was trying to scrub off guilt. "I know. I didn't think it would get this far." She crossed her arms, voice tightening. "You always say that. But it always does." Silas dropped his gaze. "Look, I was in a bad place when I met her. You know that. After rehab, I felt like I didn't matter anymore. I couldn't get work, couldn't show my face around town without people looking at me like I was broken. And she believed in me. She made me feel like a man again." Annalisa's voice dropped to a near whisper, steady and heavy. "So you let her believe it was your house." He winced. "I didn't mean to. It just snowballed. She started saying things, and I didn't correct her. Then people started treating me different. Like I was finally the one who made something of the Halden name. I got addicted to that." Annalisa looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the barn. He followed. Inside, the scent of hay and cedar oil lingered. The barn cats weaved between her feet. The goats bleated from their pens like they knew something was shifting. She leaned against the wall, arms still crossed. "You didn't lie to her, Silas. You lied to me." He stopped in his tracks. "Annie, I never wanted to hurt you. I cleaned your vomit off the barn floor the night you came back from detox. I paid off your debt so the bank wouldn't seize your truck. I let you stay here rent-free while I worked 12-hour days doing surgeries on animals people couldn't afford to save." She stepped forward. "I fed your goats when you forgot to, fixed the fence when you left it half done, paid the property tax so you could find yourself. I kept this place alive, and not because I wanted credit, but because it mattered. We mattered." Her voice cracked for the first time. "And you let someone erase me. In front of the whole town." Silas sat on a nearby stool head in his hands. "I don't know who I am without someone needing me to be better." Annalisa softened just slightly. "You could have told me the truth. You could have said, 'Annie, I messed up again and I'm scared she won't love me if she sees how much of this isn't mine.'" She paused. "But instead, you told her I was the one in the way." They sat in silence. The kind that feels like something has cracked wide open. Finally, Annalisa knelt and picked up a ledger from the barn shelf. It was their father's. She had kept it all these years, not for accounting, but for memory. She opened it and showed him a page. "Dad wrote this the year he had the stroke. Look." Silas leaned in, his father's handwriting shaky but legible scrawled across the margin. "If I don't make it, Annalisa will know what to do. She's always been the mirror of her mother." She closed the ledger. "You always thought I was just the quiet one. But I'm the one who stayed, who listened, who remembered. Silas looked up, eyes glassy. I don't know how to fix it. Annalisa nodded slowly. You've got two choices. You either help me reclaim what's ours, the memory of this place, the truth. Or you leave with her. He swallowed hard. She won't forgive me. Neither will I, she said, her voice clear. But I might still love you. He sat still, breathing shallow. Then he stood. Give me a day, he said quietly. And then he left, not storming out, not begging. Just a man finally seeing himself clearly and not entirely liking what he saw in the mirror. The kitchen table still bore faint scratches from her father's belt buckle, the ones he always swore he'd fix and never did. Annalise ran her fingers over the worn edge as Clarice Wynne set down a thick manila envelope with a finality that felt ceremonial. Clarice wore her usual tailored blazer and square glasses, but today there was a softness in her face, a kind of reverence, almost as if she too understood that this wasn't just paperwork. It was restoration. It's official, Clarice said, sliding the papers across the table. The Halden Legacy Trust. Annalisa looked down at the top page. Her name in bold block letters sat under the words sole trustee and beneficiary. For a second, her hands didn't move. She just stared at the name, at the ink, at the thing she'd never asked for out loud but had always carried like a quiet ache. No one else can claim ownership now, Clarice said. You've got legal title tax documentation, historical occupancy, and a notarized record of payments all filed with the county clerk. Not even your brother could undo this now, even if he wanted to. Annalisa shook her head slowly. I never wanted to lock him out. Clarice gave her a gentle look. You didn't. You just finally shut the door they kept leaving open behind you. She tapped the next page. And here's the designation for the sanctuary. The western acreage, the back pasture, old hay barn, and goat enclosure that's now protected land under the trust. It's officially part of the Halden Hollow Rescue Program. Forever. No zoning changes, no development rights. No one can touch it without your signature. Annalisa exhaled. They would have liked that. Mom always wanted that barn to mean something. She planted morning glories on the fencing, Clarice said quietly. Remember that Annalise looked up. You remember that I grew up 20 miles from here. My father used to bring me to the summer fair. Your mom always sold pie by the entry gate. Annalisa smiled faintly. Peach and strawberry rhubarb. No one believed she made them without a recipe. I believe it now, Clarice said. Some women just hold everything together without needing to prove it. The front door creaked and Silas appeared in the doorway, his ball cap in one hand, the other gripping the back of his neck like a man bracing for a verdict. Clarice stood. You're right on time. Silas glanced between them. I wasn't sure if I should come inside. Annalisa gestured to the chair across from her. You signed the apology. Might as well sign the paperwork. He gave a sheepish smile and lowered himself into the chair. You always were better with deadlines. Clarice laid the documents in front of him. Your signature confirms that you're relinquishing any claim to the Halden estate, including residential privileges, usage rights, or representations of ownership. In return, you receive legal protection under the new trust terms and future access to the sanctuary with permission. Silas nodded slowly. It's fair. Clarice raised a brow. It's more than fair. He picked up the pen but paused. I need to say something first. Clarice stepped out to take a phone call. Annalisa folded her hands, waiting. Silas swallowed hard. James found a letter, stuffed in an old field journal. It was a thank you note to whoever paid his first semester tuition. Annalisa blinked. He wasn't supposed to know. He's not mad, he's just confused. Said he couldn't figure out why you never said anything. Why I didn't. He said, and I quote, Dad, she didn't just save the farm. She saved me. Silas looked up at her, eyes damp. You didn't owe me that. You sure as hell didn't owe my kid that. Annalisa's voice barely rose above a whisper. That wasn't for you. That was for the name carved on the barn. They sat there in silence, the weight of unspoken years pressing into the space between them like fog against glass. Silas finally signed. The pen clicked shut like a door latching. He looked at her. You were never just a guest here. I'm sorry I didn't correct her. I'm sorry I didn't correct myself. Before Annalisa could answer, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen and frowned. Odessa Silas asked. No, Annalise said, opening the email. Worse. The message was short, but unmistakably hers. From Odessa's personal account, the subject line read, Congratulations on your little land grab. And then beneath it, I hope it was worth it. Because I don't lose. You'll regret making me look stupid. Annalisa tilted the screen toward Silas. Still your wife? He winced. I told her not to contact you. I don't need her to contact me, she said coolly. I just need her to violate the restraining order again. Clarice will know what to do. By nightfall, Clarice had filed an emergency extension with the court. She'd seen this before she said. Odessa wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. But it wasn't until the next afternoon that the full unraveling revealed itself. A call came from Officer Darnell at the Addison Police Department. His tone was clipped but not without compassion. Ms. Halden, we executed a warrant on a storage unit under the name Odessa Halden. Inside, we found several items matching descriptions from your heirloom list. Annalisa sat up straighter. What items? Photographs. A vintage dresser? Quilt work. A set of carved napkin rings dated 1965. Several frames containing wedding and baptism certificates. Your parents' original wedding portrait, all listed in your preliminary claim. Annalisa closed her eyes. She said she donated them. She did. In writing. That documentation is now under investigation for falsification. What happens now, we'll return the items after cataloging. But that's not all. Darnell's voice dropped. We found notebooks, journals, staged handwritten entries in your father's name, statements like, Odessa saved this place, drafts of speeches, letters to potential investors. All fake. Annalisa said nothing for a moment. Then she asked, Is it a crime to pretend to be part of a legacy you never built? Darnell didn't answer directly. Let's just say the court's going to want a word. That night, under a sky clear enough to see every constellation, Annalise walked the sanctuary grounds. She passed the goat enclosure, now rebuilt with new fencing. The western pasture smelled like hay and chamomile. The sign Clarice had made gleamed under the moonlight, Holden Hollow Animal Refuge. In memory of Walter and Lorna Holden. She stood there a long time, one hand resting on the old post, thinking not of justice or revenge, but of roots, how they run quiet, hidden, deep, unshaken, even when someone tries to rip the topsoil clean. She'd stayed. That was her legacy. And now, finally, it had a name. The porch light flicked on before sunset. It had always been her habit to turn it on early like her mother used to. We don't wait till it's dark to welcome people, Lorna Holden would say, flipping the switch as she set the table, or stirred a pot of something that always smelled like it had a secret ingredient. Tonight the light glowed softly over the freshly swept steps and a doormat that read, Home is earned. 6 months had passed since the legal dust settled. The headlines faded, the whispers around town died out. Even the co-op, once a stage for Odessa's performances, had moved on. These days it was just normal, quiet, honest. The Halden farm had become a different kind of landmark now. Out by the east barn, a new wooden sign stood on a cedar post, Halden Hollow Veterinary and Rescue Est. 2024, underneath in smaller letters in memory of Walter and Lorna Halden. Carried on by those who stayed. It wasn't flashy, it didn't try to explain itself, it simply stated what it was. Annalisa walked the path from the barn to the main house boots, brushing against late summer grass. The goats were settled for the night, the last of the day's patients had gone home, and the air smelled like clover and fresh hay. Inside, a small roast warmed in the oven. Carrots, rosemary, and garlic filled the kitchen with the kind of scent that made you want to take your time eating. There was no centerpiece on the table, just 2 plates, 2 glasses, and the old linen napkins her mother had kept folded so precisely that even time seemed hesitant to wrinkle them. She heard the crunch of gravel and turned. Silas stepped out of his pickup hands in his jacket pockets. He still walked with that slow, uneven gait like he was always unsure if he was welcome anywhere. But he smiled when he saw her, and this time it reached his eyes. He carried a bottle of apple cider. Figured this went better with dinner than guilt. She gave him a small smile. Depends on the dinner. They sat across from each other at the table, not saying much at first. Just eating, passing bread, letting the warmth of the room be enough. Silas finally spoke. I talked to James. He wants to intern here next summer. Annalisa raised an eyebrow. As a farrier or a vet tech, he said, and I quote, anything that involves animals and not spreadsheets. Annalisa laughed. Then we'll put him with the goats first. That'll test his patience. He's got yours, Silas said quietly. That quiet, steady kind. She didn't answer, just took a sip of cider. The fireplace crackled beside them. On the mantel above it now hung the reframed portrait of their parents Walter and his flannel Lorna in her apron, both laughing at something just outside the frame. Annalisa had rehung it last week, gently dusting the glass and pressing it into the center between the old barn nails, like anchoring history back where it belonged. Silas followed her gaze. I forgot how young they looked in that photo. You were too busy trying to outgrow them, she said softly. He nodded. And you stayed. Even when I didn't deserve it. She looked at him not with accusation, not even sorrow. Just a quiet steadiness. You didn't owe me perfection, just honesty. I'm working on it, he said. Still living in the rental down the road. Doing shoe work part-time, cleaning stalls for extra. It's not legacy work, but it's honest, she finished. He nodded. And mine. The rest of dinner passed in companionable quiet. No fanfare, no big speeches, just presence. After he left, Annalisa stood on the porch, the light still on behind her. The night air wrapped around her shoulders like an old cardigan. She looked out over the fields, her fields lit faintly by moonlight. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. A coyote answered. She thought about what people saw when they looked at land like this. Acreage, history, investment, something to be sold or named after someone else. But for her, it had never been about the name. It was about what had been built quietly and carried forward. Not everyone needs to be applauded to matter. Some people carry legacy like a heartbeat. You don't notice it until it's gone or until it rises up in one steady act of resistance. She thought of the eviction notice, the porch stripped of her plants. The sound of Odessa's voice caught on camera shouting, I own this house now, and she thought of what Officer Darnell had said that night. Ma'am, you're on private property, and she's the owner, her. Annalisa Halden, the placeholder, the helper, the sister who kept cleaning the mess after everyone else left the room. The guest, the disruptive energy. She reached up and gently adjusted the porch light's glass dome just slightly off-center. Sometimes even light needs realignment. In the distance, a single truck turned onto the main road, Silas heading home. The porch light caught the back of his bumper as he passed the gate. He slowed just enough to flash his headlights once. She raised her hand in return, then turned back inside. The night would be long but peaceful. She'd feed the strays in the morning, tend to the lamb with the bruised hoof, send the vet notes Clarice had asked for, and maybe write the first page of that grant proposal for the expansion clinic. And when people asked how she kept it all running, she'd just smile. Because the truth wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It didn't wear boots and bark orders. It was this, she didn't win the land. She just stopped it from being stolen. Again. They thought she was just a placeholder, but she was the legacy.